I believe that I've got an argument so good that I can make atheists into theists, if they're willing to listen. But of course, you can't just talk at people, you have to listen to them. I spend a lot of time in this interview really trying to get into the shoes of Timothy, to really see things from the way that he sees things, and to invite him to help me understand his worldview. I think that this is an interview the likes of which you've maybe never seen before. Welcome to Consciousness Matters. A theist and an atheist figure something out. I've prepped for this interview by just trying to really sort of say to myself, I want to be open-minded. I want to give real serious consideration to all the things that, say, might make me an atheist. So I don't want to hold on to my identity too tightly. Mm-hmm. One of the things with my channel is I wanted to call it Consciousness Matters because I wanted to focus right in on the mystery of consciousness without being too presumptuous about what's going on.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I mean, first thing I suppose I'd like to do is just open the floor to yourself. Would you like to sort of tell us a bit about how you've come to your conclusions and sort of how you identify as an atheist? Or?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I just want to just offer a sincere thank you, Matthew, for inviting me on. Incredibly grateful to be here, and also just, I guess, wanted to flag, obviously we're anticipating disagreeing along some pretty fundamental lines, and I just wanted to flag my desire and also potential inability to stay completely cordial and
that's fine.
I'm just incredibly grateful to be here, and I'm sure we'll make a pretty good fist of it. But I just wanted to flag my own deficiencies as far as being an orator and a communicator. So I guess my trajectory as far as my my thinking and beliefs around issues of theism and religion. I guess my personal story is that I was born into it wasn't a religious household at all, really. My parents were separated. My dad was a pretty strong atheist. My mum was religious, and she insisted on all of us getting baptized. She was Catholic, from a Catholic family, so we were all baptized and confirmed, and went to Catholic schools and went to church every Sunday until the age. She had a rule in her mind that when we were 15, we could stop going to church on Sunday with her. I'm not sure where she came to the age of 15, but that was the age in her mind. And I actually got out of that. So my two older brothers had to go until they were 15. But then when I was about 10 or 11, she started working on Sunday. So I got a 5-year reprieve, which I was happy about at the time. But we never discussed religion in the house, really, at all. And I certainly never really discussed ideas of theology with my father either. I just sort of knew that he was an atheist, but so I didn't really think too much about it, to be honest. In my mind, it kind of was just a pretty fair fight, and I didn't really have an opinion either way. And I remember when I was just after finishing high school, about 18 or 19, I started getting into some stuff that frankly embarrasses me now around, some texts that was trying to sort of integrate, what I see now as a fairly woo-woo and fallacious sort of ideas, but trying to integrate that to trying to legitimize those ideas. And I don't know that I was completely taken in by it, but I found it interesting and yeah. So
Can I
that
offer
was
you?
really. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I just? I mean, like, I thought, like, when I was 28, that I'd found my soulmate. So I got some sympathy for you
Well,
there. You know, that turned
yeah.
out.
Well, it's. I mean, that's an interesting. That's an interesting topic. I wouldn't mind getting there if we
Yeah,
but maybe
sure,
we
sure.
won't. But that's an very interesting. Yeah, I've been on along similar. I mean, anyway. Yeah, that was basically the extent of my thinking until it was really until about the age of 24, I think, when I read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. And for someone that didn't consider themselves religious, I'm not sure what I would have said if you asked me if I was an atheist. I might have said that I was. Um, but The God Delusion really, really had a pretty dramatic shift in my thinking, and it really is a fairly paradigmatic shift for me. And I realized it was just really sort of shocking for me to realize the extent to which I'd been indoctrinated by virtue of going to a religious school, and again, I wasn't a religious person, so but then sort of to get some clarity around what I felt was the way that my thinking and ideas had been conditioned from a really young age, was a very sort of confronting, but also intellectually exciting experience. And from there, it's become really it's a topic that I'm probably most passionate about. And I've read a lot of I've read a lot of books on the topic, and I'm really passionate about science and advocating for science. And I guess maybe this is where we'll sort of get into it, because in a lot of ways, the dichotomy of theism versus atheism is kind of an unhelpful framing of the issue. And even, to be perfectly honest, the label of atheist is actually really not something that I find particularly useful or helpful. And I mean, it's useful in some contexts, some political contexts, and it's not as if the word's not inside my vocabulary. It is, but the writer Sam Harris talks about, we don't need the word non-astrologer. We don't need to identify ourselves by our non-beliefs. And if astrology became politically ascendant in our community, then it might become useful to use that word. But really, it's just about specific claims. And so, yeah, that's really my position now. So yeah, do you want to react to that at all?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So I've listened all the way through the God Delusion. I think actually that it's a good book. It's
It is.
there's I've listened to, because my thing is really going on Audible and just grabbing audiobooks and then just sort of listening to it, listening cleaning up, listening driving somewhere. I just like that. It feels very productive. And I think that I sort of think between Waking Up, Sam Harris, by Sam Harris, and The God Delusion, I think I preferred The God Delusion a bit more.
Yeah, Waking Up, I didn't actually love as a book. I sort of love the thesis of the book, but I don't know that he really fleshed it out particularly well. He's since put out an app under that title as well, which is really sort of a companion piece. And there's much more, and there's content from other people. He sort of curates content, a lot of his content on there as well. But yeah, I didn't particularly love that Waking Up the book, although I've got to say he is, probably, well, he is my favorite thinker and intellectual, and he's encapsulated ideas, I think, very clearly and well, and I find it useful to sort of to quote him on certain things, and I'll cite him, but I'm certainly happy to defend any claim or statement on its face, but I just will want to give acknowledgement where it's due.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's definitely parts of Sam Harris's work that I really struggle with. They just don't make sense to me, but there are parts of it which are just, I think are just sort of brilliant. One of the things that he does better than I do, or at least certainly in my work so far, is the way that he uses metaphors. The way that he'll sort of tell a story to make you think about a point is just brilliant. I think that a good example of this really is sort of like, how do you interpret, like if you assume that there might be some value in scripture, then how do you get it out of it? It's a recipe, it's a cookbook that he goes through, right? And then he says, I've got, I don't have the text in front of me.
Yeah, I know exactly that's in his first book, The End of Faith, and it's
right.
It's a pretty powerful example, and it's I found that a very effective piece of communication for sure.
Okay, cool. So I suppose I better tell you sort of the quick run through of sort of like how I've sort of come at this.
Yeah, great, please, yeah.
So I had a very, very easygoing sort of like a Christian upbringing. I didn't particularly enjoy going to church. It really struggled just to sort of pay attention, and it didn't feel like there was very much, it didn't work for me, basically. But I sort of considered myself loosely Christian, probably up until I started learning about science at school. And I'm like, how does that work? So if Jesus is going to walk on water, exactly what happens? Because that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, are we talking about like a suspension of the laws of physics? Are we talking about I just couldn't process it, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that the problem that I got from the understanding of science that I had, and I think this is probably one of the avenues that sort of leads people back into considering theism through different routes, right? So it might be something a bit like Panpsychism. It might be something like Idealism. Have you come across Bernardo Kastrup's work?
No, I haven't.
Okay, that's all right. It seems like they have this problem that when we want to explain everything in terms of physical laws and atoms, molecules, fundamental particles, quarks, gluons, whatever you want to throw at that, we have this problem of how we get consciousness out of that at the end of it. It's a really mystifying problem, and I remember thinking in the lunch queue at school, it's sort of like, well, if everything's just sort of following these equations, right, and it might be oversimplistic thinking, right? It might be. But if everything's just following these equations, then there's, it's like I'm not determining my own life at all. It's just stuff going on. Mm-hmm. And I think that really clashed with me. That was such a big clash.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Well, this is, if you don't mind me jumping in, this is another issue that's become sort of very close to my heart, and it's interesting. You're sort of tracking my intellectual development, because I was really a passionate atheist after, I guess, starting with the God delusion and then pursuing that line and reading more and more, and consciousness is something that I hadn't really I don't know that I thought about it at all, and it was only about 2 or 3 years ago that I became sort of confronted the so-called hard problem of consciousness,
right?
And became very interested in philosophy of mind, and that's about the same time I started my meditation practice, which is it's I guess it's sort of linked to my interest in philosophy of mind and consciousness, but it's that's sort of an aside, I guess.
It's great stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really. I'm more interested in getting my philosophy of mind right than I am in hanging on to a label of theist. Right?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, and the next part of that equation is the problem of free will.
Yeah.
And yeah, I am completely on the side of free will not being a thing, and any attempt, the so-called compatibilist attempt to, rehabilitate the notion of free will and hang on to it, is wrong, and it's also unhelpful and dangerous in my view. And maybe we could get into that later. But as far as philosophy of mind and the problem of consciousness, I'm completely with you that I mean I believe I'm taken in by the hard problem of consciousness. That is to say that consciousness itself is fundamentally, conceptually irreducible.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know that. I mean, I'm sort of convinced that there's not going to be any way around that. Like the only evidence for consciousness that I could ever experience or have is my own consciousness. That's not solipsism either, because
I get it.
to be a solipsist, the burden is on you. I mean, so it's just unknown as to how consciousness arrives in the universe. I think you're on pretty safe grounds scientifically to assume that the brain is involved in our case.
Involved in consciousness or involved in how it comes about?
Well, I'll just say it's involved, and we know it's so tightly. Yeah, well, it's just so tightly correlated with conscious experience, as far as it's certainly tightly correlated with function. We know a bit about areas of the brain associated with motor functioning and language, and it's obviously a much more complicated story than just isolated areas of the brain working separate from each other. But we have correlated brain function to certain neural networks. I'm not a neuroscientist, so forgive me.
Me neither.
Just want to flag that. I have no expertise. I just want to flag that. So yeah, and with conscious experiences as well. We know a bit about anesthesia, and you're on safe ground to assume that the brain is involved in conscious experience. But as you point towards, we really can't say as to with any certainty as to the brain being involved in causation. Exactly, that's right. And in my view, we just have to swallow that pill. We just, we certainly have to swallow the pill that we don't understand it now. But more interestingly, on a conceptual level, we may have to swallow the pill that we just can never surmount the hard problem of consciousness. Because how could we possibly, really?
I think that we've got this mystery, and if I was to say to you, right, I believe that humanity can just figure all this stuff out. I just feel it in my bones that we can do this. That would sort of be a faith in of itself, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, it would be based on the evidence that we have of having worked out a great many things.
We have
up until this point. Yeah. So
it's
it's not completely blind faith, but I take your point.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. It is evidence based. Yes, quite right. So I suppose I think this is. I think there are different ways of looking. There are different philosophies which solve the problem. I think there are philosophies right now
The problem of consciousness.
The hard problem of consciousness, right?
Wow. Okay.
I think there are philosophies in which it's just not an issue, right? So if we've got something like panpsychism, because I don't want to be too wedded to one thing, though my personal favorite at the moment is idealism. But if we look at something like panpsychism, and what we've said to ourselves here is, we've got a weird thing going on in the universe. Let's just do the same thing that we do for all weird things. If we can't reduce it any further, we'll just assume it's a fundamental building block, and we'll build up from it. So I think the simplest version of that is that sort of idea in panpsychism, that we could say every particular fundamental particle, right? So we might even make mistakes about what is fundamental at the moment. It doesn't really matter in principle. We're just going to say that every fundamental particle has some tiny aspect of experience to it. Might be completely outside of what we understand. Doesn't matter. That doesn't mean to say that it doesn't. And as soon as we've got that as a ground, it's sort of like, in the same way as we use the behavior of fundamental particles to build up a model, we can use sort of like the experience of fundamental particles to build up larger experiences. And that's the combination problem. How do we get all these different particles with all these different experiences? How do we sort of glue that all together and combine that into what we understand in human consciousness? Now, I think that seems to solve the hard problem, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I guess it does. It doesn't get past the reality of the conceptual irreducibility. So in the case of it's a wild idea. It's people have a sort of emotional reaction against it, I feel like, because it's just sort of violates our common sense principles. You know, in the case of this desk that you can't really see in the shot, but is in front of me. So if it's something that it's like to be an electron, if electrons are having this tiny little, this dull sort of experience, it's not going to be anything like the experience that it's going to be like to have neurons organized in the way that they are in my brain. So, and it's hard to imagine what would be different, I guess, is what I'm saying, because it's not as if the organization of atoms such as they are in this desk is a thing. That's not the system that's conscious. The system that's conscious under panpsychism is these tiny constituent particles of matter. So if it is something that if there's something that it's like to be an electron or any other subatomic particle, it's kind of hard to imagine what would be different, right? Because it's not as if the desk would start talking or walking around.
Yeah.
So it is interesting to consider the idea, and I guess we just have to be agnostic as to the truth claim of, and there are different types of panpsychism as far as I understand it.
Yeah.
But as far as getting around the hard problem, I don't know that it does, because it's still, for me, the fundamental, and this might be a misconstrual of what the hard problem is, but the way that I'm thinking of it is that, that it would be impossible for me to actually have firsthand evidence of an electron being conscious in the same way that I couldn't have evidence of you being conscious.
Right.
Despite believing that you are.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. And it's in terms of what you can actually sort of empirically test right now. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Well, but right now or ever, because I sort of, my feeling is that there's just no way to, I don't know how you could possibly bridge that gap, because I think it is impossible.
Is it? Do you think it's a sort of a sensible choice though? Sort of, because the hard problem is such an awkward problem that I feel that it shows us that we've missed something, that something isn't right. There's a lack of elegance in the way that we explain things by sort of saying, matter's along, it comes together. You've got physics gives rise to chemistry, chemistry gives rise to biology, biology gives rise to minds. Guys, it just sort of happens. I mean, it's that it's the explanatory gap, right? It's
yeah, and I just have to flag my my status as a amateur philosopher, and I think from what I understand, I haven't read much of his work, but Daniel Dennett, the philosopher of mind, doesn't take this line, and
correct,
and sort of takes the line of what you were just starting to sketch out around it being a misconception and a fundamental misframing of the problem, and it being sort of a false problem.
There's a user illusion. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I can only sort of I can only appeal to my intuitions as they stand, and I can't get past the. So, are you familiar with Thomas Nagel?
A little bit. What it's like to be
that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So. Yeah. So I just can't get past the framing put forth in that paper of, it does seem like a binary thing, no matter what the experience is of any given conscious system. There is an experience or there's not, whether or not a bat is conscious. And I think they are, they likely are.
Agreed.
It's going to be, no matter what the character or qualia of that experience is, there will be an experience to be had in if switching place with them, if as much as you can make sense of that statement, in the way that switching with a rock isn't, but that is ignoring, that's sort of disregarding panpsychism, I guess, because it might be something that it's like to be, if not a rock, then because a rock is sort of a meaningless system or a concept, but an electron's not,
right.
But it does. I don't know. I sort of personally can't get past the binary, the binary nature of that. Like it sort of seems to me that there is either an experience or there's not.
I agree. Yeah, right. Even if it's a dull experience, right?
No matter what the experience is, yeah.
It's there or it's not. Yeah, I'm on completely the same page as you there. Yeah.
Can I ask you about? I don't know anything about idealism.
Right. Absolutely. That was exactly where I was thinking of going next. So instead of trying to build minds up from the fundamental particles, idealism flips the whole thing on its head. Rather than a bottom-up approach, it's a top-down approach. So, and I quite like it from the point of view that really, if, and, I'm not a physicist, but I love physics, right? And I did physics at A-level. That's the best thing I can say.
So
what's A-level? A-level's...
Oh, it's just like education that you didn't have to have.
Okay, cool.
Just, it's in between like a full like college degree.
And,
right.
Cool.
So... with that, I mean, if you sort of like see the universe as sort of like one quantum field within which there are perturbations which sort of map onto these fundamental particles, it's a unitary system again, right? It's not that there are particles and they're separated across time and space. The whole thing's just a thing, right? It's the whole system.
So
with idealism, you're sort of considering, and it gets a bit, we're going to sound like we've been smoking stuff.
It's a bit like...
the universe is just a giant mind. And what you have to do then is you have to explain consciousness as dissociations of that mind. So it's like a bubble of experience within this, the rest of experience. So... I'll give you an argument for it, I suppose. If I was saying something like, well, I look like matter to you, but there's an experience of what it's like to be me on the inside. So behind the matter that is me is this sort of consciousness. And we can have the discussion of whether it's doing stuff or not after. But in the sort of like in the idealist view, then the whole of the rest of the universe is much the same thing, right? It's matter that has some sort of consciousness behind it, and it's not really that's what it boils down to at its simplest components, anyway.
Right. Okay.
It's not any sort of denial of physics or anything like that. It's merely just to sort of make sense of where conscious experiences are and how things are breaking down.
Right.
So
okay, I'm sort of. Go ahead.
I was just going to reiterate that sort of idea that with sort of panpsychism, you're building from the bottom up. You've got the combination problem to solve. With idealism, you're building from the top, or you're working things out from the top down. But then you sort of have to explain dissociation. Like, why is it that we've got salad, right, and maybe some chicken, and maybe some potatoes, and get enough of that, we can rearrange it into a brain, and boom, it's conscious. Like,
how the hell does that happen?
Mm-mm.
So that's the dissociation problem, yeah.
Okay, I'll have to investigate it, and I'm having trouble, and obviously it's you haven't been given much scope to elucidate what the perspective is, but I'm sort of having trouble mapping it onto.
These are really big topics. It's fine. It's not a problem.
No doubt.
Sort of a follow up. It's no issue whatsoever.
I guess, could I ask you to? And so, does idealism to you? How does that relate to your views around theism or any specific theology?
Absolutely.
So I think I would struggle to classify myself as a theist if I was sort of taking the panpsychist angle. It's not impossible, because I'm still sort of presupposing a mind behind the universe, but it's more like minds. And I'm not even sure. This is the thing that really keeps my mind open to atheism in principle, right? It's this idea that, well, okay, Matthew, let's say that we grant you that there's a mind or minds behind the universe. If those minds are so widespread, if like every little fundamental particle has its own little bit of being, then if you want to construct anything that looks remotely like a god, you're going to have to do the combination problem all the way to the infinite degree, right? Does that make sense? You don't just have to explain conscious human minds doing things. You sort of have to funnel it all the way up, and you have to say, everything combines in the end. Ha. And see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
But then you're sort of having panpsychism almost echo a little bit to idealism. But I think, so I would say that I'm just rationally persuaded at the moment, and I'm open to having my position changed.
I would say I'm persuaded
that idealism just makes the most sense of everything right now.
Right.
Don't want to be open to new evidence,
and conserves the idea of a god, for want of a better word.
Well, it sort of does, but okay. Tell me what you think of this, right?
Because
sure.
But I think that I tried to steelman what theism was. I'm like, what is theism, right? What's a god? And when I did a Google search, what I got was something. I'm probably going to butcher the exact thing, but it was the belief in a god, specifically of a creator who intervenes in the universe, a creator of the universe who intervenes, something like that.
I'm just sort of thinking to myself.
Now, the intervenes bit is tricky. That's my weakest point, the intervenes stuff. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
Especially if you want to take it into not just intervenes, but a personal god, that makes it all the more awkward, right? But just keeping it on how do we define theism, I think, God comes with so much baggage, right? It means different things to different people. It means different things to different theists. Another theist might say, that's not God, this is God,
And so forth.
Well, this is, if I could interrupt,
Please.
This is why I was sort of alluding to earlier, why I sort of feel like it's a very unhelpful and a false dichotomy between theism as a general notion and atheism. and to me, theism really, as a blanket term, is really, yeah. I mean, the definition you just sketched out is completely valid, but thinking about it in those generalized terms is really, to me, kind of pointless. And to me, it really just comes down to specific claims. You know, you can class different systems of belief along their commonalities, which is what theism is. But you don't arrive. You know, you're not looking at these decision trees and arriving at it. That's precisely the reverse way in which people come to their beliefs, and these belief systems develop. So,
can I just paraphrase what you said there, just to make sure I understand?
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah.
Is it sort of like, is your concern that people are backwards rationalizing things?
That is a concern. It's just a false problem, I think, as far as thinking about you know, the validity of quote unquote theism. You know, I just think we need to examine specific claims. Well, basically, really.
This is where I need good people like yourself to keep me honest, because I feel like I'm doing this all by myself, right? And it's really, when you're trying to figure stuff out for yourself, to just get a little bit away with the clouds, and you're like, hang on a minute, I best check in with some other people here. And there's nothing better than disagree with you.
Well, that's true. That's true. And I will just say that this is, I don't mean to, you know, very few people, atheists or theists or however they would identify themselves, very few people take this line and this view. So I don't want to speak as though I'm speaking from a majority viewpoint, because I don't believe that I am. So yeah, let me just flag that. But I appreciate you, your receptivity to it. But yeah, I mean, and this is really why it's you know, the atheism theism dichotomy just really breaks down and becomes unuseful and meaningless in my view. To me, I really do view this through the lens of science and I guess science / reason more generally. I use science not in the very sort of narrow use of the term as far as people in white lab coats in laboratories. You know, I really do see science. I'm evoking a more Carl Sagan use of the word and
the scientific process.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah, scientific viewpoint and yeah, exactly, just evidence-based reasoning and logical consistency and all that good stuff. So I really do view it as yeah, like I keep saying, that the analysis of specific claims. So I mean, we could get into it, or we could not. I'm not sure, but
let's please.
I'm not just being rhetorical. I'd love you to actually check my thinking on this, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
I think that. So I fell in love with Steelmanning when I heard it, probably for the first time, with Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the Pangburn philosophy events.
Yeah.
Why doesn't everyone do that?
Yeah, it's an incredibly, there's it's funny that I think that word has only become a use of jargon very recently. Obviously it's in reference to the notion of strawmanning, which is well known in rhetorical terms. Have you heard of Rappaport's rules?
No.
It's a system of rules devised. I actually don't know, to be honest. I think it would be RAPP AP. Oh, yeah, you'll find it's a sort of it basically just sketches out the Steelmanning, what it means to Steelman, and it was a sort of rhetorical guide that was popular among philosophers. But yeah, the notion of Steelmanning is so simple and so important, and something we should all strive to do, that people are just not disposed to doing much these days, you know. And it's yeah, I very much yeah, I admire the notion as well.
So I'd like to try and build a Steelman out of theism, and I'm going to keep it as minimal as possible because then I've got fewest claims as possible to substantiate. Before I do that, though, if you don't mind,
there's just
because obviously I was sort of like quite excited. It's quite a nice thing to be able to get you on the show and whatnot.
Yeah, likewise.
And someone, I've only got one of these things. So someone said, could you please, or they'd like to hear what you think of a particular argument. Now, it's not the one that I would have gone for.
It's not my choice, but
sure. Yeah, please, yeah.
Fantastic. So this is an argument that's sort of like presented by Fabian Cuello. I hope I've done all right with the name. We'll see. Number
we
one.
Love you, Fabian.
Number one, there are only two explanations for the existence of the universe. It came from literally nothing. No laws of physics, no matter, no nothing. And then it says in brackets, let's not imagine a black void because that would be something. Close brackets. Or it came from an infinite reversion of universes. And then in brackets, what the multiverse theory proposes. And number two, the concepts of nothing and infinite are out of grasp for our minds. We don't and can't understand what nothing or infinite mean. Number three, therefore, there are aspects of reality that are supernatural, in brackets, beyond known natural laws and matter, and will remain unknown and mysterious forever. Number four, therefore, there is an open door for supernatural and metaphysical beliefs.
All right. Can I just react to that?
Please do.
I do not accept the argument.
I didn't think you would.
So I guess, yeah, I've got some issues with it that I'll just sort of go through and flag sequentially. I think in premise one, it's a false dichotomy. It's, yeah, I mean, it's to limit the two possible explanations for the existence of the universe. It came from literal nothing, no laws, no physics, no matter, no nothing. Let's not imagine a black void. I mean, I guess that is possible. It doesn't strike me how it could actually be possible in that conception of nothing, and it's not that nothing is impossible to conceive of. It's a valid concept, but it may not be valid in terms of physical actuality, if that makes sense. Or it came from an infinite reversion of universes. I'm just not sure what that means.
I think what they're saying here is that it's sort of like way of saying turtles all the way down. There's always something. You keep probing into the universe, and you just keep finding more stuff, and there's never a
infinite regress.
Yeah.
Type.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I still don't know exactly what that means. An infinite of universes. Maybe I could. Yeah, I'd like to hear that sketched out a bit more.
Okay. Yeah.
The concepts of nothing and infinite are out of grasp for our minds. We don't and can't understand what does nothing or infinite mean. So, I just fundamentally reject that premise as well. Whether or not the concepts can be understood doesn't relate necessarily to how those concepts map on to reality. It's true to say that the concepts of nothing and infinity don't map on to reality. I'm not saying that's necessarily true, right? But that could be true as far as, in my limited understanding of things.
If I may just stop you for a moment,
sure.
I've got to be honest with you, and I'm so sorry, Fabian. I feel like I can grasp the concept of nothing.
Yeah, I agree. So Yeah, that is my rejection of premise 2. So we agree there. Number 3, there are aspects of reality that are supernatural beyond known natural law. So this is, I have an issue with this as well. So there are aspects of reality that are supernatural, and then that's defined as being beyond known natural laws and matter. See, that is, to me, is not the definition of supernatural at all.
Right.
Right. If you think back to, the era of Isaac Newton, right? And he was an incredible, probably the greatest ever scientist, and as far as he devising the laws of the laws of physics and motion, and there were laws, natural laws, and constituents of matter that weren't known and have since been discovered. Right, that doesn't make them supernatural. Quite clearly, that's a misdefinition of supernatural. I think that's pretty clear, and will remain unknown and mysterious forever. That's just a claim that can't be justified, in my view.
I think what they're saying, though, is that there's always going to be some aspect of reality that we just can't comprehend.
I mean, that may be true, or it may not be true. We can't say with any. That's a claim that can't be borne out with any certainty.
I feel like there are people shouting at their screens, "God of the gaps," at this point.
Well, it's what it is. It's exactly what it is, and it's. Yeah, they would be right to scream that. Therefore, there is an open door to supernatural. Yeah, I denied. Sorry, Fabian. Denied, my friend.
I'll sustain
still love you.
On its current iteration. And what I'm hoping is, right, that possibly Fabian checks out this video and we can work through it, and we can...
I'd love to hear more, for sure.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Well, I think my thoughts after going through those 4 points is the word supernatural even useful? If we're going to say that...
It's an interesting word. Yeah, go on.
If we're going to say that anything that we encounter is going to be natural, and you know what? I get that reasoning. It makes a lot of sense. I'm not poo-pooing the reasoning, but what is supernatural then?
Well, I think it really speaks to what a point that you raised previously around. I think it would have to be a suspension of natural laws in the way that you were referencing events in the Christian Bible, right? So
walking on water. Yeah,
exactly. Because so this is a good place to land on. So in the case of those, so let's get into specifics, right? So the case that Jesus indeed walked on water, that is a claim about physics in the case of that local single event, in so much as you would call that a single event. I know event in physics.
Would we call this a mind over matter claim?
Say that again.
Would we call this a mind over matter claim? Because Jesus is walking on water because Jesus wants to walk on water, right? It's not just something that just kind of happened because he was...
Well, that's certainly not an explanation that is satisfying to me.
No. I'm not saying it's an explanation. I'm just saying, could we agree that that's a category of claim? That's all.
No, I don't think so. I don't think I could sign on for that, because, well, I mean, maybe that could be a subcategory of claim, but I don't think it would be something that I would find useful, because it is. Yeah, I mean, how do you explain that event as described, right? So, I mean, it is a claim about, at bottom, physics as far as, that event. And again, I know that event in the physics context, that means much more granular things than the event of Jesus, walking on water.
It's got to be God or Jesus or God through Jesus that's acting the suspension though, right? It's like, well, there were going to be rules of physics, but we're just going to intervene. It's you know what I'm getting at? I mean, it wouldn't be.
Well, I think that's the only thing. I was just going to make the point that I think that's the only thing that could really constitute something being supernatural. Because what else, as you were getting, like, what else could supernatural really even mean? You know,
I can't make sense of it. Like, as a theist, I can't make sense of it. I'm serious, right? Like, it would just... Okay. Just for the sake of argument, right? Just for the sake of argument. Let's say that Jesus did walk on water, then there would have to be some sort of natural God law that allowed that to happen, or natural other thing. I mean, there's no reason to call it...
So for you, that's natural, right? Yeah, I see, yeah.
I'm just... It's like, natural has that infinite regress problem. As soon as you start explaining it, it becomes natural, and then...
Yeah, I think I agree. I think I completely agree. It's a very slippery word and notion, supernatural. And I think for most people, most of the time, it just refers to a category of event that's otherwise unexplainable. But I guess I believe in principle that those type of events just don't exist. And I think you agree, right? It just depends on what your explanation is. So in the case of Jesus walking on water, in so much as that's...
I'm very sympathetic to where you're coming from. I don't really believe that Jesus walked on water, but I'm not sure what happens in the universe. I'm not sure to what extent.
Well, okay, so this is interesting. So so you take that as a metaphorical claim?
You know, I feel bad, but I haven't spent a lot of time trying to make sense of scripture. I just sort of I sort of thought about it a bit as a teenager and thought, well, this doesn't stack up with that, and then I just went, okay. I tried to, when I was learning science, I tried to let science chip away at what God could be, not necessarily dismiss it, but like, okay, well, that's not what's going on, or that's not what's going on. And I think it left me with this notion of minimal theism, actually. But I don't want to jump into minimal theism unless we're quite happy that we've sort of, addressed the areas of what we're already talking about right now.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess, this is interesting. It's sort of hard for me to bridge the gap because in my, conception of things, I'm always puzzled and frustrated by exactly this area, because people are really happy to dispense with the specific claims in any given theology or scripture, and yet those larger overarching claims remain intact, and I just don't understand how that happens for people. And even in getting into the sort of bigger stuff with people, the people can happily dismiss the walking on water or the bringing people back from the dead or the, whatever, water into wine, whatever specific miracles you want to point to. People will happily sort of dismiss those claims, and they'll either talk about it in terms of useful metaphor, or even more puzzling in my view is people that acknowledge that it was intended as literal, but you would just have to be misguided or silly to maintain those beliefs. But I don't understand how the belief in the more fundamental stuff remains intact, because at the very least you have to question that those truth claims. People just hang on to the notion, these more sort of nebulous notions of quote unquote God, and it remain, in the case of Christians, it remains the Christian God. But yeah, to me, the book is either divinely inspired, a divinely inspired document, or it's not, right? So if you think it's divinely inspired, by what metric or process are you coming to the conclusion that some of it is incorrect or fallacious? you know?
Well, I mean, I could give you an argument there. It's just a back and forth thing at this point. So I would suppose that if God talks to people, I did not expect myself to be saying this.
No, please.
If God talks to people, how do we know that they're able to relay that properly, right? Let's put this into a more colloquial sense that's possibly a little bit more easier. Like if I go and sort of like take psychedelics and I'm like, the universe spoke to me and it said things. Like, am I going to convey that accurately, or is it going to get jumbled up in the translation?
Well, I just think it's, you know, that is a claim.
Yes.
And it's there's no evidence to bear that out. It's all the evidence that having a psychedelic experience, all that is evidence of is the fact that you had a psychedelic experience. You know, you can want to make other claims, and we can just start to weigh those claims up. So, I just really view everything in these terms. So the claim, did Jesus walk on water? I mean, we've discussed that a bit. We can get into it more. Is a claim. The claim that there is a God is a claim. And I don't know that there is a single, I don't know even what would constitute evidence for that claim, because
I feel like
there's I might just continue for a moment, if you don't mind.
Please.
You know, certainly every piece of evidence put forward in religious discourse, theological discourse, has been, you know, proven wrong, right? I mean, it just comes back to the God of the gaps thing. Like, there is just, given our scientific understanding, it's hard to really conceive of what there is left for God to do, except for, you know, the creation of the universe, right?
This is sort of like how theism over history has got pushed back to deism, right?
Yeah, exactly right. But people, and again, I mean, and this is sort of an aside, but it's sort of interesting to consider. You know, I find it really interesting and kind of hilarious when, you know, Christian debaters will talk about the ontological argument or the Kalam cosmological argument, but you could grant those. There is a million miles between that and the God of the Christian Bible, or any given Bible, right? And how they think they get from there to that, I have no idea. And that's really, like, I would love to. I would love to.
One step at a time, presumably.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's just, but it's just impossible given what, you know, given the state of our scientific worldview, right? And so getting into the more foundational aspects of, I guess, what Fabian was getting at, or trying to get at unsuccessfully, in my view, but, you know, around God creating the universe and you know, all that sort of stuff. I mean, aside from having no evidence or good reason to think that it's likely, I mean, I can't rule it out, right? And I just have to swallow that pill. But there's no, it becomes, you know, it does, and sort of, as you, I think, were alluding to earlier, like the notion of God just becomes a completely meaningless concept in that case, you know. I
think I can make sense of it, but
right, okay.
Before I go on to minimal theism, I think there's something really important to mention about other people's claims, and I think you and I are probably going to be on the same page here. I don't want to be too presumptive, you know.
Sure. No, let's find out.
But I think that there's one sort of claim, which is the claim that drives what you believe, and it's sort of important to you, and it's your interpretation of reality. But I know reality is a question of constant interpretation anyway. But it's different when I'm saying, "Hey, God told me that you should do something," and that's where, oh yeah, well, why didn't he tell me himself? Do you know what I mean? That's where I'm a little bit more, I suppose, sort of classically in sort of like a more atheistic thinking camp. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would agree. It's yeah, I mean, there are lots of obvious logical inconsistencies around those sorts of specific claims, and it's a perfectly valid question to ask why he wouldn't, communicate. I mean, it's interesting to think, if, and I guess this is where the doctrine of faith has become relevant in Christianity, but God could make me, a believer. It would be, trivially easy for him to do so, right? He could make himself apparent and known. He could appear. I'm not. I could become a Christian, right now or tomorrow or whenever I'm presented with the evidence. I could do it.
Suppose I could too.
Yeah, it's not. My atheism, my rejection of any given religious belief is not unfalsifiable. It is falsifiable, and that's an incredibly important rational and scientific principle.
Yeah.
And the same can't be said for many religious people. There's nothing that could disprove there's no piece of evidence that you could give them that could disprove their religious conviction. And sometimes they'll admit this, and sometimes they won't. But in the case that people admit it, it's strange. They don't quite understand what they're admitting there, So, yeah, I sort of lost my my train of thought.
That's all right. It sort of made sense to me. I just sort of scribbled falsifiability down on a piece of paper.
It's an incredibly important principle. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is important. I'm not going to disagree there. I think that it does have limits, though. So if you've kind of got, gosh, it's like a classic one that gets trotted out quite a lot. But you've got Gödel's incompleteness theorem in the sense that there's a certain limit to which you can actually check things are right. And you've kind of got falsifiability concerns around things like many worlds theory. But I do think falsifiability is important. I'm not trying to, I just wouldn't want to make it all important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, the many worlds thing's interesting because, we aren't. It's sort of almost like the hard problem thing. Like it's a bit of a unassailable gap. There's no way that we could test that part of the theorem. But I guess, quantum theory is so successful as a, quantum field theory is so successful as far as its predictions that I just think until we have a better conceptual understanding of it, then we just have to take all of the predictions seriously. One of which is, there's a few different types of the way that many worlds
interpretations.
Yeah, but it just, I think we have no reason not to take it seriously, even though we can't directly inspect it.
I think that so my own position on this is that it's not a preferred interpretation, but I think that while we're not sure, it's worth considering, right? While we're not sure which interpretation is the real one, then I think that just keeping an open mind to all of those interpretations, including many worlds, seems like an eminently reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, I really just do take a Bayesian. I try to take a Bayesian viewpoint on everything. It's really just a matter of probability.
It's very nice, but there's always the Bayesian trap. If something's never happened to you before, you'll never predict it in the future.
How do you mean?
So, if I've never had an experience of being in a house fire, I might say, well, what's the probability of me being in a house fire? And if I just think about my own experience, and I'll be, oh, it's never happened. Oh, it's never going to happen. It's just that trap. I'm not saying that we have to throw Bayesian ideas away. It's just a sort of like being aware.
Yeah, but that's just a miscalculation of the that's just a misconception of what the odds truly are. If you and as you know, as apes, we're we're completely vulnerable to that at all times. But with everything as far as we understand it on the scale, we know that house fires happen to a certain degree of probability.
Yeah, it's not just my scope. I've got to consider everything else.
So getting beyond your own personal scope is the salient factor there.
Definitely.
But that's a difficult task for all of us on a daily basis. I'm sure it certainly is for me.
No, definitely.
So I guess I just wanted to, if we can, just keep pushing a bit more into really the claims of. I'm interested in where you. Where the line is of which claims you reject and which claims you accept in a Christian context.
I'll just come straight out with it. So I've got a couple of places that I could go with right here. So I think there is a mind behind the universe. I think that's more likely than not. I'm not convinced. I don't claim to have knowledge. I'm not like, oh yeah, definitely, absolutely, completely, definitely. It's the mind.
Can we just linger there for a second?
Yeah.
So when you say a mind behind the universe, you mean a creator essentially, or?
Well, I can't get away from that sort of conclusion. If mind is an integral part of the universe, then mind plays out a critical role in the way that it forms, assuming it's doing something. But that's the meta problem of consciousness, and we should probably leave that till we've discussed. Well, it's up to you. But I would suggest that we leave that until we've just established the basics of minimal theism first.
Okay, well, maybe go on with that, and I'd like to come back to where we are now.
Okay, sure. So the meta problem of consciousness. Oh, this is where it gets really good. This is like, and I think this is one for everyone, right? This is not like a theistic thing at all. The meta problem of consciousness is this idea of why is it and how is it that we're sort of talking about consciousness, and it's fantastic for me because it really puts a finger on this giant mistake I think a lot of people are making, including Sam Harris. It's all very well saying that consciousness is real, that there is this felt experience of what it feels like to be us. But then to say in the next moment that this felt experience has no power to change things is completely erroneous in my mind, because we're talking about it. I mean, do you see what I'm getting at? This sort of idea of epiphenomenalism, which I think is quite intellectually trendy, is this idea that mind is like this prisoner, like that the physical states, the physical world somehow conjures up mind, but then mind in turn doesn't affect the physical world. And the obvious thing that I can think of to that is, well, okay, then why are we talking about mind?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, because I do. I'm not arguing for consciousness being an epiphenomenon, but
I know. Thank you for yeah.
But I am open to it. I don't dismiss it outright.
I do now, until someone has a better reason.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, I guess and I guess part of this gets into the free will thing as well. I do think that everything that arises in consciousness can be traced back to unconscious causes, unconscious propagation of causes.
But that would have to include the fact that you say that it feels like something to be you, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it does. I think it encompasses. I think everything, my entire life trajectory, and including every word that I've said in this conversation, was, whatever the combination between determine
a result of physical processes, right?
Yeah, exactly. No matter what component of randomness plays into that, right?
Right. I know what you. Yeah. No, I remember. Yeah. So my problem logically with that, right, and rationally, because I really do want to build. I'm really interested in a logical and rational argument here. So my problem with that logically is if we can say the fact that you said that it feels like something to be you is now reducible to physical causes, then it sure as hell didn't come from you, unless you're physical causes. Yeah,
no, I agree. So does
that mean that there isn't something that it feels like to be you? It's just the motion of the atoms.
So this is the distinction between the the reality of experience. See, it's a misdefinition of the word you. So, and this is a really useful thing that and way of thinking that has become really exciting for me in the last couple of years. So, me, as so far as me as a concept is not a thing that really exists. There's just my, there's each atom that comprises my, the physical system that I am in each moment. And you can analyze that from a physical perspective or a biological perspective, or there are many different levels to analyze that, right? And there's also my conscious states in each and every moment. So that exists as a thing. But
how do I know that it exists?
What's that, sorry?
Well, how do I know that your conscious states exist?
Well, you don't have any firsthand evidence of that. This is the hard problem of consciousness. Yeah, I think you likely do believe that exists. But this is the hard problem of consciousness. There's no way for you to get firsthand inspection into the reality of my conscious experience. And we don't have to go back to the hard problem, but I think that is an unassailable gap. But so to say that something would come from me, to me, there's no way to map that sentence or claim onto reality. That's an incoherent sentence in my view, including thoughts and intentions. The things that feel most like us. And don't get me wrong, it's we all have. I believe that certainly most of us most of the time carry around the psychological illusion that we ourselves and that there is that we are thinking our thoughts and we are manifesting certain things within our reality, but ultimately I think that's an illusion.
I think would you go halves with me? Would you say it's half an illusion? Because I suppose what I have as an issue, right, is that I totally accept your point, right? You were absolutely hit the nail on the head, really, and it wasn't quite what I intended, but I accept the fact that you made a good point in the fact that I can't know that you're conscious. Fair enough. But what I can do is that I can know that I'm conscious, and then I can extrapolate that you're conscious, and that works, right?
Yeah.
Good old theory of mind. So I know that when I say that it feels like something to be me, it feels like it comes from me. It's sort of like this. It's just a proof for me that. Well, why am I saying that it feels like something to be me? This is the meta problem of consciousness, by the way. This is the bit which gets really interesting.
Yeah, I think it might be a false problem though. Let's keep lingering. So, if I'm trying to think of how to frame this. If we can easily trace back the origins or the historical events that led to us having this conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't be saying exactly the words that you're saying or the thoughts that you're having right this moment had it not been for those prior causes,
right?
Yeah, I just think that the dominoes have always fallen that way, and you can trace back and there are many different levels of analysis, but it's just inescapable, the reality of that long line of dominoes that essentially goes all the way back to the origin of the universe. Mm-hmm. And consciousness just is a separate phenomena that could all of those physical events could theoretically happen down to the sound waves coming from my mouth into this microphone and going across into being received by your brain, hearing those signals on the other side of the world, and all of that could be happening without consciousness being a reality. We could essentially be zombies, philosophical zombies, or robots, right?
Great point. Yeah.
And I just sort of, as far as my understanding and conception of things at the moment, I just accept that that's true, and that doesn't.
So we are philosophical zombies.
No, because we do. Well, I certainly, I am having an experience, and I believe you are as well.
Yep.
But my point is that consciousness is separate from causation, fundamentally.
How does it talk about itself then?
How does it talk about itself?
Yeah, how does consciousness express itself in the physical world as a conversation about consciousness if it's real but doesn't cause effects on the physical world?
Yeah, I don't think that it does. I think each of us are conscious systems that are conscious of the conversation taking place, but I don't see how there's a causal relationship there.
Well, if consciousness wasn't causing anything to happen, would it not follow that we wouldn't have conversations about consciousness?
No.
You don't? Okay, so that wouldn't follow from one... Yeah, okay, right.
No.
So, all right. Well, this is good. This is interesting because we've covered a lot of common ground, and now we're starting to find out some points of diverging ideas, right? And beliefs. Okay, this is good. Right.
It's a sort of a. Yeah, I can see why that idea is appealing and seductive, but you wouldn't be tempted to draw the same analogy with anything else. It's just it's a bit of a...
Yes. No, this is really important. I completely agree with you. Really, seriously, this is such an important point. I think that we can't, in principle at least, we couldn't be reasonably sure that I was doing anything. But when I think about it to myself and I'm like, well, I know that it feels like something to me. I'm experiencing it right now. Holy shit, I'm telling somebody else about it. It has causal powers. That's how I go through that list, yeah? And I... Can we... I know you're going to have some objections to it, but is it all right if I just outline how that gets me to minimal theism? Just quickly.
Please. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right. So I say to myself... okay, so consciousness has some sort of causal powers to make things happen. No, I'm not saying it's all powerful. I'm just saying it does stuff. Yeah. I'm not saying libertarian free will. If I really concentrated hard enough, I could levitate. I'm just saying the way that I try and make... Because I want to try and explain this to you for this reason, that I do take the science seriously. I like, well, what can I actually extrapolate from science? And I see that quantum mechanics gives us multiple possibilities of how things could turn out. Well, as far as I can see, that is the only reasonable place that we know of. That's a very important caveat. The only reasonable place that we could know of within which there would be space for you to pick one option from another, right? So, okay, so I say mental causation is just something that's fundamental in the universe. And the reason that I say that is because I'm sort of talking about a new causal force. I'm sort of saying that in order for me to be causing things, I had to arise somewhere, right? And if I had to arise somewhere, what are we going to do? Are we going to have the universe go a few billion years into its runtime, life emerges, and poof, new conscious force comes into existence? Or am I going to say, well, I guess it was probably just there all along? And as soon as you say it's probably just there all along, I think you've met the standard of minimal theism.
Wow, okay, interesting. Is it... Okay. Right, okay.
Even if you disagree with me, I'm hoping you can see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I can... My first impression is that it does denude, theism of any real sort of... It is sort of closer to deism, because that still doesn't map onto any... It sort of strikes me as more of a panpsychist argument. I still don't understand the bridging of consciousness and causation, I guess.
I'm not sure I understand the bridging of. I've got
bridged.
some understanding of it. But there's so much I don't know, right?
Yeah.
The thing that I can be most reasonable, so in the way that I see things, the thing that I can be 100% certain of is that when I say that it feels like something to be me, that actually was mentally caused.
Yeah, but caused by what?
Well, I mean, this really does sort of take it back to sort of thinking of mind as some aspect of the universe, right? And I would say let's treat it like any other natural phenomena. Why should we have it appear in the middle, like after so many years of delay? Because we wouldn't do that with electromagnetism.
I think that's you don't need to invoke that to explain that. You can explain it in terms of, there are plenty of people that have existed. Take it broader than that. There are plenty of conscious systems that have existed on this earth that have never asked this question. At all. And you just happen to, live in an era where we have the language that we do and the conceptual understanding that we do to ask that question. But all of that can be explained in terms of prior events, and none of it has to map onto you, the event of you, uttering that sentence or asking that question at any given moment. To my mind, can be mapped onto, prior causation in the universe, the way that anything else can, the way that any other mental event or physical event can.
So I would agree with you that my opportunity to say it was caused by prior events, but I can't get my head around the idea that when I say that it feels like something to be me, that I'm conscious that it doesn't come from consciousness, that it wasn't causally, it wasn't caused by consciousness.
What's special about asking that question? Because it feels like something to be you, whether or not you ever ask that question, right?
Oh, right. Okay. So I don't, let's try and, because I don't want to get a confusion sort of appearing here. So what I'm trying to say is that the ability for us to ask this question demonstrates that consciousness has some sort of causal powers. I'm not saying that by asking the question, those causal powers get switched on. So I'm not saying that consciousness wasn't causing anything right up until the point where it said, oh yeah, I caused me talking about myself, right? I'm just saying that there's some sort of aspect of selection.
That distinction, because you wouldn't be tempted to, it's only this category of self-awareness that you're around this particular.
It feels like the solid ground from which to reason other things from. So I would say that if I was granted that ground, then I would say, well, because obviously that's where you then start to do more reasoning. But I needed something completely solid, and to me, this looks like something completely solid. So if I accept that,
I think I just fundamentally disagree with that point. Yeah, I think I just disagree. So I can't grant you solid ground there. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Well, let me tell you a little bit about where it'd have gone if you had, right?
Yeah, sure.
If you had have granted me that solid ground, I would have said that it seems very odd that I'm able to express the idea that it feels like something to be me to somebody else, but then that I don't have any influence over any other events. Like if consciousness was just around just to say, hi, I'm consciousness and it feels like something to be me, and that's all it did, that seems absurd to me. So I think that...
it does. This is the epiphenomenon question, right? I mean...
Yeah, absolutely.
It does... I won't deny that it sort of does seem absurd, but I as far as my... I just think it can't be ruled out, Do you know David Chalmers, the Australian philosopher?
I think David Chalmers is my favourite philosopher. As second favourite of Bernardo Kastrup.
Oh, nice. I don't know his work particularly well, but I really the lectures that I've watched and from what I've heard, I do find him a really appealing. He just seems like such a cool, nice guy, and intellectually very interesting for sure. But
he's got a podcast he did with Sean Carroll.
Well, this is what I was next going to Sean Carroll, because Sean Carroll's criticism of the zombie thought experiments is sort of compelling to me.
Yes.
Because Sean Carroll argues that a philosophical zombie, in such that Chalmers invokes it, couldn't really exist because if a philosophical zombie is going to truly act exactly like a human, and well, then if you asked it if it was having an experience, it would, because by virtue of being exactly like a human, it will say that, because that's what a human will say.
Yes.
I don't know. It's sort of a neat way of refuting that problem. I actually don't necessarily completely buy that, but it does. I think it's valuable as far as elucidating that it's not quite as simple as proposing that thought experiment might suggest.
My thoughts exactly.
All of that aside, yeah, I personally, I just think we have to bite the bullet that consciousness as an epiphenomenon is on the table still, and I do agree that there's something strangely absurd about that proposition. But
I see.
I just can't rule it out.
I think this is starting to get really weird as a thought in my head, but if it didn't feel like anything to be me, God, I don't know. You know what? I don't even know how to process the rest of that.
Well, you would be. You just wouldn't be. But part of the profundity.
But I
absurdity, am. What's that?
I said, but I am.
well, yeah, exactly. But part of the profundity and absurdity of thinking in these terms, I think, is born of the fact that we are so taken in on a moment-to-moment basis of the illusion of self. So, the idea that there is some essential part of us aside from our stream of experience, and I just think it's really, it's not just helpful, it's sort of essential to dispel with that notion. Do you know the philosopher Derek Parfit?
No.
So he was a British philosopher. I think he was at it was Oxford or Cambridge. He passed away in the last 10 years, but he arrived at a fairly Buddhist, it was very much aligned with certain ideas in Buddhism and other Eastern traditions, based on a series of thought experiments. Maybe after this I can send you some stuff that's there's some good content that sort of it explains his ideas and that really, yeah, sort of prove the.
What was his name again? I know you're going to send me this stuff anyway, but
Derek Parfit, Derek, and surname Parfit. I think that's correct.
Lovely, thank you.
So, yeah, in my view, there is no Matthew Riddle aside from each, you across a temporal plane. There is no Matthew Riddle aside from you in each moment. And again, we can look at it from each side of the coin. So from a purely physical manifestation, so each atom within each cell of your body in each given moment, or the stream of your experience across at any given point in time. So, it's if you try to point to what you could be outside of that, it's really impossible to pin down what you could be. I mean, even and again, in the same way from a consciousness perspective or a physical perspective, right? So, I mean, are you the exact same set of atoms that you were 10 years ago?
Ship of Theseus, yeah.
What's that? Sorry,
the Ship of Theseus.
Oh, I'm not familiar.
Sorry, it's a great one. I think it's exactly where you're going with this, right? So it's the idea that my atoms are changing. So where's the real me? Am I following this form, or what's going on, right? If all of my cells have been replaced, am I still me?
Yeah. Well, we use it is sort of exactly that idea. I mean, it's sort of getting to the fact that, you know, selves or you know, it's about, we are a set of relationships, physical relationships, and you know, it's the car isn't in the axle is in the car. And I mean, it's a sort of a simple way of getting at it, but you know, if you take the door off of a car, one door off of a car, is it still a car? I think most people would say it is. Yeah. I mean, but you know, you keep taking away constituent parts, and at what point does it cease to become a car? It's like there's no definitive point at which it ceases to become a car. And I think that, you know, the viewing our quote unquote selves in this sort of through this lens becomes really helpful in sort of framing these sorts of, a lot of the problems I guess we've been discussing, I think, are ultimately pseudo problems. They're not real problems. They're problems born of a misconception of you know, yeah.
We just haven't found the right model to make sense of it yet.
Yeah. But I think I think I'm convinced that my conception of these sorts of things is coherent and consistent. So, but part of that is having to absorb some uncomfortable truths, one of which is that free will, there's no way to make sense of free will in my view. There's no possible way. So I just have to accept that as true.
What is it about the possibilities of how the world could be in quantum mechanics that makes you think, well, there's no way that consciousness could be a selector in that? What made you rule that out as an idea?
Well, I as far as my understanding of things, there's certainly no evidence for it. And I know that within the early days of quantum mechanics, it was a sort of a trendy line of inquiry. And you know, at the start of our conversation, talking when I was describing my when I was 18 or so, when I was looking into some of these ideas, it was a lot of that stuff was leveraging this idea that consciousness and quantum mechanical properties were linked.
There's a really interesting and good reason.
As far as my understanding of things, there's no rational connection between the two, no evidence-based connection.
Okay, all right. Well, I think I'd love to sort of like just ask some questions on that. I think so. There's one thing that I've just sort of noted down here. I'd really love to know a little bit more about what you mean by illusion, first of all, because illusion is one of these really squiggly terms. If you're suggesting that consciousness is not what it seems, then it would be almost impossible to say that wasn't the case. So I'd be very open, very, very happy to say that consciousness is not what it seems. It's an illusion in that sense. But if we're talking about illusion, I think sometimes people think that what you're saying is that it's not really there.
Well, I didn't say that consciousness is an illusion. I was talking about the self being an illusion, and also free will. Free will and the self are really sort of two sides of the same coin.
Okay, well,
but I would make the argument that consciousness, our moment-to-moment conscious experience, has a different character than most of us tend to think or realize. But that doesn't make it illusory. But I do believe that the self, the feeling of a self, is an illusion.
That leads into this idea here, then, I suppose, that I feel like you believe that there can be experience without one that experiences, or without an experiencer. And I can't get my head around that. Can you help me?
Yeah, it's a real mind fuck.
I just think it's incoherent.
Yeah, I do believe this is. I mean, this is the sort of the goal, and I just want to, I want to flag outright that I don't claim to have any particular. I don't claim any expertise in area. Mm-hmm. Certainly not meditation or these sorts of practices. But I do, I have had experiences of quote unquote selflessness, and exactly what you got at. Having an experience without one that experiences is it's eerily close to specific instructions within certain meditative practices. You sounded like a spiritual guru there for a second, without intending it. No, seriously, that is some of these precise instructions, and it's sort of supposed to be a the incoherence in the instruction is kind of the point. It doesn't quite get you all the way there, but
oh man, but it was thinking. No, you know what? That's amazing, because it was thinking about what Daniel Dennett said, that there isn't really consciousness, that made me realize that there was. I mean, I
completely agree. I mean, I actually take the other view that consciousness, not only is it not an illusion, but it's the only thing that can't be. I mean, this is a Sam Harris line, but consciousness is the only thing that can't be an illusion. And to me, it's just, and again, it gets at the fundamental irreducibility of consciousness, and whatever the character of our experience is, the reality of having an experience. We could be in the Matrix right now. We could be brains in vats. All of that's on the table, but what is indisputable is the reality of experience itself. So I certainly would never argue for consciousness to be an illusion, but more specifically the illusion of free will, which free will is self-generated causation, and the feeling of the feeling that we have, that we ourselves, it really does feel like there's a part of me that's in me now that was in me yesterday, that hasn't changed.
Me too.
That is, that is an illusion, and I think you can come to that understanding conceptually and philosophically in a way that's coherent, and you can also come to an experiential. You can come to that perspective from an experiential pathway that's also coherent.
I can't get coherence out of it. That's I think that's where that's why let's assume you're right and I'm wrong. That's the reason why I can't get to where you are, right? It's because I can't make sense of that. I can't. I can't.
Well, and I also I don't want to make it seem as though I came to this position quickly or easily as well.
Sure.
So I just have to flag that as confidently as I speak about these ideas now, it was, it took me a long time, and I'm not saying that you're necessarily going to come to the same position, but I just need to communicate that this wasn't an easy position for me to come to. It was actually quite difficult. So
that's all right. I mean, I think I'm trying to dig at this to see what we can sort of like talk out rationally between us, because I think that I've never seen it. I don't. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right places, but I've not seen really good theist versus atheist, charitable, good, decent debates. Where are they? I can't find them.
There's a couple. There's really not many though. There's really not many, and we should probably wrap up reasonably soon.
Yes, we have been going a little while.
But I completely echo your sentiment around the lack of good content, and most of it I think is by virtue of the fact that it's not conversational. I think neither of us really did much preparation for this, and I just want to. I mean, I'm so thrilled to have been given the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
I'm really happy to have you here.
The spirit in which you've conducted it, and that's awesome, man. It's and I, hopefully we can do it again.
Absolutely. You know what? I know it's niggling me a bit, because I know that maybe there's a way that I could understand you better, but I just haven't been able to quite get there today. In that whole, I don't want to make this my last word. I want to give you the last word, actually. So I'll just say my piece, and then you say whatever you want after that. And we'll call it a close at that. How about that?
Sure.
But it's whole. So we both agree that consciousness is real, yeah? It's the most real thing that we can possibly know. And then in my mind, I go, but I can talk to other people about it. So it has to be able to have some sort of impact on the world. And I don't want to take that and scare people off by running all the way to theism with it in one go. It leads me there, but, one step at a time. We've got to figure things out on things that we can be sure on first. And I'm not against the idea that consciousness, maybe it does just pop into existence through some means that we don't understand, right? That's a possibility. I don't think it's likely, but it's the thing that I have the most trouble getting my head around with the conversation that we've had so far. If I was to sum it up to one point, it would be, I just can't get my head around the idea. From my own personal first-person perspective, I say, it feels like something to be me. I'm describing what it is to be me. And that seems to work.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess I don't accept the causal relationship as we've already said between consciousness and the relationship between consciousness and causation. Basically, I would not accept that. I disagree with that premise. So that's where we're diverging, albeit at a pretty early point in the proceeding of matters. But no,
that's great.
Yeah. So I mean, it's been really fun and awesome. And I mean, are you going to put this up, do you think?
I will. This will go up.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, look, I'd honestly love to do it again at some point. So
that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, cool. Awesome.
What I want to do is I want to say that I want to be open to trying to understand your point of view. And I hope, we can, I'm sure you're obviously in this sort of, the way that we've had this chat seems to illustrate to me that you're happy to do the same sort of thing. So if we sort of persuade each other or nudge each other a little bit either way, it would be just fantastic to come back to this and see if we've been able to change each other's minds. But even if we haven't, we've had a conversation that I feel is really valuable.
Look, likewise, Matthew, honestly, likewise.
Thank
you. Been, if nothing else, but for just being a lot of fun to talk about this sorts of stuff. And you've been a really great interlocutor. And again, I just really graciously thank you for hosting me.
Thank you, Timothy. It's appreciated.
Awesome,
can I give you a shout out to your YouTube channel or anything like that?
You know what? I don't have a channel. I'm about to start a Twitch channel. So I haven't yet organized that, but maybe before the time that you upload this, I'll have it organized and I can contact you with those details if you wouldn't mind.
Perfect.
Giving that a plug for me. Awesome.
All right.
Great, Matthew. Really lots of fun.
Thank you very much. I believe in the system of trying to get to the root cause of a disagreement and trying to really understand why it is that people believe different things. And as far as I'm concerned, we figured out what that was this episode. Now, I think the interview stands on its own, so I'm not going to say very much in the closing thoughts for this particular episode of Consciousness Matters. But what I will say is that I'm very interested to hear what you think. There's such a lot to comment on here. Thank you for watching, and be well.
Most people think consciousness is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
We all have our own inner movie.
Consciousness is an amazing collection of sort of mundane tricks in the brain.
If nature is made of nothing but unconscious matter, how come we're conscious?
Consciousness is irreducibly subjective. Now that sense of being a subject, a locus of consciousness inside the head, is an illusion.